Welcome, our Beer Flight School attendees. My name is Josh Gosnell, here with Lily Margolis, and this is the start of our beer journey together. Today, we're going to start with a very simple, but at the same rate, deeply complex question of what is beer? So, Lily, what do you think on just a first impression? What is beer?
Well, I know it's not wine.
Nope.
I know it's made differently than wine.
Exactly.
No grapes in there.
No, most of them. Beer is just that classic serve it at ball games. Your granddad watched it or drank it while watching football. But what is it in essence? To break it down to its fundamentals, the very basics of what beer is, we've got 3 of our 4 basic ingredients. The first being hops. No, this is not weed sitting in a glass here, although they are related. They are cousins. A lot of the same things that weed has, hops will have. So, first thing, I love the smell of hops. It's one of the key ingredients in most, if not all, beer. And it is one of the foundational points of it.
So does every single beer have hops?
In one way, shape, or another, yes. So you say you don't like hoppy beer, we'll get into that later on. But 99.9% of beer has hops in it, in one way, shape, or another. Second off is our malts. It is malted, usually roasted barley. This is something that you can think of, a little bready aspect to it, a little malty, grainy in that front. So there's also a bunch of other grains that are used in beer. We have oats, we have wheat, we have rye, we have corn, we have rice. But fundamentally, barley is the key ingredient in almost all beers. Third one, really simple, water. Makes up 95% of the beer. The water matters as well. You don't want to be using some water out of a mud puddle to make your tea at home. Same sort of thing goes with beer. We don't want to be using dirty, unclean, hard, or too soft water. And it's another discussion for another time. Fourth main ingredient in beer is something that can be in the air around us, which is yeast. Different kinds of yeast, different methods, different procedures to that. But yeast being that driving factor of converting everything, all these sugars that are within the grains, into alcohol and CO2, which is that bubbly, that carbonation that you get on your beers.
Is the yeast that's in beer going to be the same as the kind of yeast that's in your bread?
Yes and no. It will be in the same family, but like I said, there are a couple different types of yeast and or bacteria that are used in beer to provide certain flavors, certain styles, certain profiles to it. So, we have all of our ingredients set. Now, how is beer made? We start with the grains. The grains won't be usually used in their whole form like this. They'll usually be milled. Then we add our water. With that, the water in there helps extract a lot of those sugars out of it. So you know how baker's yeast works off some of those same sugars to produce that CO2, which makes bread rise. We don't let the air just escape into nowhere. We use that carbonation, that CO2, to carbonate the beers. After that is set and steeped, we make like a little bit of a porridge out of our beer. We just have our grains, we have our water, we let that sit at a certain temperature. It won't exactly work at room temperature, and there are certain steps involved to prevent or to extract certain things from the grain. There's some undesirables, some more desirables in there.
Does the kind of container for this first step matter?
Not as much. Typically it's a mash tun. So the mash is what you get with these 2 ingredients to extract some of that sweetness, some of those sugars out of the grains. From the next step, they drain a lot of that off They leave just the grain bed. They drain all of that water, all that sweet wort. Not like a wart, like something you want to get removed. W-O-R-T. It drains off all of that sweet liquid, all of those sugars, all of some of the malty flavors in there, those bready sweetness to it, and they pull that all off. Now, a lot of breweries will use those grains. They will donate them or reuse them in like dog cookies, or they will send it to a local farm to be used as like pig feed, cow feed, something like that. Still very nutritious for the animals. Not a complete diet by any means. If you've ever tried just eating bread for an entire week. But on to the next step, we add in the hops. Now, I like to think of hops, the way that they're used in beer, as making tea at home. It'll have some of the same sort of effect. You know, you steep a tea for 5 minutes versus 15 minutes. What is that difference going to be? You know, at 5 minutes, you get some of that aroma. It's a lighter body. You go into the 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, it starts to get bitter. So same sort of thing with hops. They'll add some hops at the beginning, middle, end, or even after the boiling process has begun to create bittering, flavoring, aroma, or different sorts of aspects to the hops that you can pull out of there in the same way you would brew tea. Then the yeast comes in. All of these fun little particles in the air, all that fun stuff that goes in bread will get pitched into the finished product. From there, we wait for sometimes weeks or months for the beer to be done, for the beer to ferment, to give us that sweet alcohol that we want in our beer and the carbonation.
So for when the hops are added, is the liquid beer or soon to be beer, is it boiling the entire time?
No. Usually with the mash in, with this wort, it's at below boiling, but warm enough to be able to extract certain sugars, certain starches, certain enzymes and things out of the grain. Now, when it comes to the hops themselves, yes, they're definitely boiling, extracting all of that out of there, because to get some of those oils, to get some of these compounds out of there, it does take that higher temperature for it. But you don't want that with the grains.
Gotcha.
Getting some of the tannins that you might get in wine.
Yeah.
Very, very undesirable in beer for the most part. And then onto the hops, that bittering preservative agent, and then the yeast, waiting for that fermentation to finish, and then packaging it.
Are there different kinds of like barrel materials that you can use to change the outcome of your beer?
Absolutely. In general, if we're just looking for a mass-produced, very approachable beer, something very simple, Coors, for example, if we wanted to use that, it would just be giant stainless steel containers. But there are plenty of oak-aged beers. There's Sam Smith out of the UK using Yorkshire squares, or like giant stone squares to ferment the beers in. That oak barrel aging, there's a whole world going into the aging process, or what it's eventually fermenting in, that affects the final outcome of the beer, for sure.
If I got all these ingredients, could I make beer at my house?
Yes. Yeah, homebrewing is huge, especially here in Colorado.
Really?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot to do, but it's a great experience as well. Well, that pretty much does it for the basics of how beer is made, what is beer.
Ask your questions in the comments and tune in for Flight School next time.